All right, I think we got this fixed. So it's like the 10th time trying this for it now. We realized that if you call in and do these for it, both people that are doing the calls have to be on the same time for it. So hopefully this works now for it. I'm on my cell phone. Benny was on his computer, so I think we got it fixed now. There we go. Was I works finally? 10th
There
time
you go.
charm.
Let me back this thing up a little bit. Yeah, sorry
I
about
need to be
that.
closer or further away, whatever makes me look not as like goofy. That's what I need for it. The right angle for it.
Pushing it
Yeah.
back, right? Sorry about that. I actually figured do it on the computer would be easier. I even had my little call center headset on. I was
No,
ready to
that was
rock and roll.
a miscommunication on my part, so I apologize.
All good.
I had this go with my cousin a minute ago. I was like, I'm gonna have this fixed. We're gonna do this, do smooth, called in, and then it was like lightning storms, news going off, and then my Alexa was blowing up with like thunderstorms warning. I was like, that is perfect combination for the first one of these for it.
Yeah, work out the kinks. It's
All
all
right.
good.
We are much appreciated. So you've been a huge contributor to the Texas Slow-Pitch Jigging group. I know you haven't been there very long for it, but I think you've brought a ton of information for it. So we greatly appreciate it. We're trying to do these more often. Like Texas, I wouldn't say we're behind on everybody, but I feel like it's kind of gone East Coast and kind of crept its way towards us a little bit. So
Yeah,
anything.
it skipped over Texas. I don't know why, but because you guys have such a great fishery, but it really started down here in Florida mostly. Kind of picked up a little bit on the West Coast. It's been a kind of a long haul there as well, but yeah, Texas is starting to get on, which is good. It's good to see.
Which I'm hoping to see more of it. I know we got a little bit of a boat ride. It kind of sucks that it takes us a little deeper to get it takes a little longer to get deeper water. I'm a little envious of you guys on the east coast of Florida. We're 3 miles out and you're a few hundred feet like that.
I mean, you could throw a rock and hit 100 feet of water. The problem with that is that it's so accessible that everybody can do that too, right? So it's like a blessing and a curse. You have on one hand, you can get out to this really accessible deep water. On the other hand, so can everybody else. So you don't really have as much of a target rich environment. It's not as much work to get out there. So I actually fish in the Gulf probably more than I fish in the east coast of Florida anymore.
That's interesting. So do you think because it's so heavily fished and the fish get hammered, do you think jigs are like a way to separate away from some of the bait and stuff like that, that it gives them something different
Well,
to see than what they're traditionally used to?
that's really why it started in Japan, right? Because a lot of the areas were fished out. So in order for them to get these fish to strike, they had to figure out a different way. And the only way they could really do it, because they weren't really aggressive on baits, was get a reaction strike out of them. So the reaction strike is kind of like the quintessential part of slow pitch. It's a very easy meal. Fish go right out and get it. So here, yeah, you can still trigger all those reaction strikes for fish. That's fine. But we also deal a lot with current, right? Our Gulf Stream comes really tight. So we'll be in, very close to shore in 3-4 knots of current, which isn't ideal.
No.
So it's difficult. And this is really where we learned and figured it out. So we kind of started in the hardest possible place to do it. And then you go to the Gulf and you're in, a half knot of current, you're barely moving over ground. And, it's a hell of a lot easier.
So maybe I should have a better introduction for it. I know you because I've watched a ton of your videos, so I've watched you probably more than you definitely know any of us for it. So kind of give an introduction for a lot of the newer guys in the group. Vinny is one of the probably the pioneer of bringing slow pitch jigging to the U.S. Correct? So how did you get involved in all this for it?
Yeah, I was one of the very early adopters, I guess you could say. So I mean, originally I started, bait fishing just like everybody else. I kind of have a unique story with that because I really didn't fish saltwater until I was probably 30. I mean, I grew up in upstate New York. I fished like brooks and streams and ponds, but not really a lot. I was more into sports, and I would kind of do fishing occasionally, a couple times a year. And then I moved to Florida about like 17 years ago or so, and it was really just a way to get away from life, right? You get away from emails, get away from work, get away from whatever. I live fairly close to the beach, so I started going on these, local head boats, basically like tourist trap boats
Yeah.
here. But it was really good for me because I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I was kind of in the middle with like a rental rod, and I was realizing these guys at the end of the boat were catching fish, and why were they catching fish? And there had to be a skill to it, right? So my personality is I kind of get a little obsessed with stuff, especially if I like it. So I started, really getting into bait fishing, bottom fishing, combat fishing with, other guys on these head boats. I had a couple of the mates there kind of take me under their wing and just show me basic stuff, like here's some knots you could use, and really like that, because they realized I was actually into it, right? I liked it. And then after, a couple of years of doing that, I was like, all right, well, I kind of figured out bait fishing. What else is out there? And I saw that Shimano had this butterfly jigging system at the time, right? So this is, I don't know, probably 12, 13 years ago. And so I bought myself a, Travala rod and a Torium reel
Those were
and got my power.
literally my first two purchases. I swear to God, a Travala, it was up to the 200 gram, and I had
Mhm.
a Torium 16 PG, and I still have the Torium, and I actually gave the Travala rod to the captain we used so he'd have a slow pitch rod.
Yeah. So it was really, at that time though, it was speed jigging, right? So the butterfly system was a speed jigging system. And I noticed, at first what would happen is I'd bring it on the boat, or, if it didn't catch fish in the first couple of drops, I'd go back to a bait rod, right? After a while, I started going online more, getting into like forums like back in the day. It's still around, but
Yep.
360 Tuna used to be a big forum site for that. I met some local guys here, so that were doing jigging in general. So you had like Brian Dietz, Doug Wen, Jeff DeStefano. Who else was there? Ray Shecker. He was big with it. He was a rod builder, and kind of formed a little group of us. And we went on this like jigging only trip, and so I couldn't bring a bait rod, and that's when it really got into, oh wait, it works, and I'm catching fish, but I'm catching like jacks, kingfish, like pelagics, things like that. And in the summer in Florida, it's just so hard to jig, like speed
Mm-hmm.
jig consistently. I was like, there's got to be something else, right? So I, started using some Google Foo and found that there was this thing called slow pitch jigging or slow jigging in Japan. The problem was nobody had any stuff, and none of the stuff that was online was really in English. I mean, there was that Angler Secrets, which is a great webpage that I really suggest for anybody. Todos is like, he's in Okinawa and he's fluent in English, so his website's in English, and it's a really good site for like the very fundamentals of slow pitch. But what we quickly realized was that using those very strict Japanese fundamentals here, we were getting our asses handed to us. Like just was not working. Like our line was too light, our leaders were too light, our jigs weren't heavy enough, and that's where the trial and error came in. Right, that's where it was. All right, we got to bump our jig weights up. We have to try to find the jigs in Japan. At the time, there was no like AliExpress. There was no go to the local store and pick up jigs. There was no Jig Pro. There was no, any of these local sites. And even the Shimano stuff that was there was all the butterfly
Yep.
stuff. So it was still geared towards that speed jigging. And that's when the trial and error started. So it was buying stuff sight unseen. It was, hoping that the rods got there. You got these $500-600 rods that are coming, getting, an evergreen Poseidon, never touch the thing, and it shows up and you use it one time. You go, maybe this isn't for me. And then all right, back to the drawing board, start again. And over time, we kind of figured it out after about 2-3 years to get it dialed to really what most people use now, in terms of just the tackle in general, kind of that balance of finesse versus power. And then it was just the long haul of trying to explain it to folks. What the hell is this thing? What are these rods? What are these reels? And I think one of the reasons why I was kind of successful with it was I just never stopped. I just kept going with it, and along the way, met some folks the right time. One of my buddies lived in Fort Lauderdale. He was like, "Oh, you fish, right?" And I was like, "Yeah." He's, "We want to go do this shoot for AFCO, just kind of be a person in the background, right?" This was like 2015, I think, and I was jigging off the back, and they were fishing for sales. I wanted catching all the fish. They didn't catch a sail, and the rep for AFCO was on the boat, and he was like, "Wait a
Yep.
minute, you should probably be on the team," right? And so that's where I got noticed with AFCO. I've been with them for like about 8 years now. After that, it was I started fishing Temple Reef. There's Calvin Tan. You may have seen Real Spa online. He's in Singapore. I talked with him a lot. He was the guy who pretty much developed the Levitate series of rods, got noticed and picked up by them. So I worked with them for a couple of years. I had a couple of like signature series rods come out, which is really cool to work on developing tackle. Had the Innovate come out with them. And then 2019, that's when Shimano came knocking, and I told them no.
We were curious. Yeah, I was curious about that whole transition from it all for. That was one of my later questions to get into for.
When Shimano came, I had just come out with some rods. I had my name on a bunch of stuff, and I just didn't think it was the right thing at the time. But then, in talking with the folks, they understood, for the next year. I was like, this is what's going to happen. And, because it was, once you get with Shimano, it's kind of like it's a different kind of relationship. It's a different kind of relationship, and it's, you're there for the long haul, and you really have to make sure this is what you want to do and look through everything. And, the Yankees come calling, you say, yeah.
I don't doubt you on that one. It's going to be hard to say no to that.
Right.
All right, ready to get into this crazy little Q&A action for it? Get you some.
Yeah.
See what you got? All right, so
go.
I guess the one that we have, so we have a lot of newbies and whatnot for it. So I kind of sent you a list of the questions, and some of this I was writing down for it. So kind of neat. My aunt and uncle are from upstate New York, so I went a few years ago doing Northern Pike up in like Lake Placid and like Saranac Lake area for it. So I know a little bit about your neck of the woods, just a tad. All right, so first one I want to hit you with is, we're probably all guilty of these. What are some rookie mistakes that you see a lot of people guys do on the water, or just buying tackle or crap they bring on a boat? You're like, I wish I would have been able to tell you before you bought that or did that you don't need that, or you shouldn't be doing that.
Okay, so first of all, thanks for sending me the questions beforehand. I'm usually pretty good on the fly, but I actually got to think about a lot of these. So rookie mistakes that I see the most. If we want to talk about actually on the boat before we'll talk about tackle in a minute, but biggest thing I see is getting too excited in the fight. Okay. Oftentimes when folks get that strike on a jig, they get super excited for it and they don't kind of embrace like, all right, I'm in for the fight and I have to really work with the limitations of my tackle. And oftentimes I see them do things or go back to techniques that they've used in the past. So for instance, lifting and pumping, putting the rod, kind of in their hip, not fighting off of the reel, really using the rod a bit too much. And even for bait fishing for folks, it's a more efficient fight when you're pointing and cranking that fish as opposed to lifting and pumping on them. But I think that's one of the biggest ones, and I see a lot of newbies lose fish that way. Not just getting too excited, and that really is just a time on the water thing. You're going to have that learning curve in the beginning. What else? Another big thing I see is relying on what I call good enough. Okay. I hate that. I hate it. I hate it with a passion. And this kind of goes back to what I mentioned before about those mates taking me under their wing. So there were three mates in particular. There was Sammy Reagan, Jimmy Weir, and a guy named John Casio. John Casio, he was an older guy, and he'd seen Fort Lauderdale in its heyday. He'd fished South Florida his whole life, and he had this mantra. He was like, never lose a fish from a preventable error. And I always keep that in mind every time I'm on the boat. Anytime I see a little nick in the leader and go, oh, it'll be all right. No. Make sure you retie if you have to, because you never fails. You always get that big bite when it's not good enough. Is your hook bent in a little bit? Is it bent out a little bit? Don't play with the good enough. The same thing with like your knots, right? I still don't understand why people use an FG knot for this type of fishing, other than like the fear of tying a PR knot, which I had the same thing because I was scared to tie the damn thing. But it's an 85% knot on its best day. When you're operating at these small margins that we're operating at in terms of our tackle and using the super light stuff for big fish, why not use the best knot possible? Why not use a PR knot? It's like those are the types of preventable errors that I see that people don't use. Or don't follow when they're on the water. Now, in terms of tackle, one of the things I see people do is, I get it, it's expensive. This is not a cheap game, right?
No.
And I, more than anyone, I understand how much it costs. I very much understand that. I mean, right now I'm very fortunate that a lot of my tackle, gets mailed to me, but I've purchased a ton of stuff, so I know what it feels like. The problem is a lot of times people are too focused on the price point, and a lot of times the lower price point stuff, it's just not good enough, right? And when you're using this super specialized tackle, there's certain stuff that you can get away with and certain stuff that you can't. So you'll see companies, everyone's jumping on the slow pitch train, right? But the problem is there's very, 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 very few really know what to do in terms of rod building, in terms of construction, in terms of action, things like that. And what happens is you get a lot of repurposed stuff. So there'll be companies, that'll have like a repurposed 12 to 20 inshore rod, reconfigure the grips on it and call it a slow pitch rod. And that's not going to work because the recoil is going to be too fast and you're going to have a bad time. All right. There's other companies out there with like the unbreakable rods. They're solid, that kind of stuff. A lot of those are, masking inferior building. They're, I get it. There's a budget for folks. And if it works for you, by all means, rock and roll, do what works for you. But what I find is that if you kind of buy middle of the road stuff, even when you start, you're at least able to resell it for roughly the same amount that you got it for, maybe a little bit less. And that's, kind of cost of doing business. Like that's just what you pay for the using of this, but you can resell it. Right. So, get a Torium 16. Don't go for the, Gomexis or whatever it is, or, get a grappler. That's, it's a $300 rod, but you can sell it for $250, if you don't like it or whatever, but it's still a great rod. I mean, hell, I use those all the time. So spend a little bit of money, just understand that you're going to have to make an investment in this to some extent, and you can preserve that investment as long as you get a little bit better stuff. Don't go straight entry level, because a lot of the real straight entry level stuff is just not that great.
No, it makes a lot of good points for it. Like you said, I think that's a lot of us who've done bait fishing, whatnot, our whole life have developed muscle memory of immediately, because in the moment you go back to what you're used to. And so in the moment you go back, or if you're like me when we first started, you're just excited to hook something, right? So you just like, I've been jigging for hours and I haven't hooked anything. And you hook the first thing and you're like, I just want it in. I want to see what I got.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly right. And relax. It's all right. A lot of times people will say that, you want to reel past the sharks. You ain't reeling past the shark. You're just not. Even speed jigging, the fastest speed jigging you can do, I'm talking 2 handle turns a second. If you do the math on it, the jig's only moving 7-8 miles an hour in the water. So you're not going to reel past a shark. They can certainly swim faster than that. So if the shark's going to get it, they're going to get it. It just is what it is. But just relax, focus on the fight, settle into it, and you'll be all right.
The biggest thing is also teaching people they're so used to fighting the fish with the rod traditionally that you fish with the reel. So it's the completely different mindset of like, and we had to learn that for it. And the first fish I ever hooked into, I lost because of a shark. I can admit that for it. First fish I hooked into, I was so excited. I was like yelling on the boat, and we got sharked halfway up. I'm like, cool. But I was just excited to actually hook something up. Because it's a little discouraging. And so what do you tell like rookies get into us that are struggling, right? Because it's something that it takes skill and time for it. And a lot of people are instant gratification. They're spending all this money. They want to be able to catch fish, but it takes work getting used to it for it. And it might take you a while to find your niche.
Yeah, there's no substitute for time on the water. There just isn't. It's going to take time to do it. And what I recommend is leaving all your other stuff home. That way you don't have an option. You're going to do this, right? If you bring your other stuff, you're going to go back to what's comfortable. It's just human nature, right? So I think if you leave that stuff home for a couple of trips, understand I might not fill the cooler today. I might catch fish today. It just might not happen. But, just try to get the feel of it. A lot of times with folks, rather than go and buy a bunch of expensive jigs, get some like hammered diamond jigs, right? Just the old school hammered diamond jigs. They catch fish. They've caught fish forever. They'll give you a general idea of what that thing is doing in the water. You don't have to worry so much about cutoffs. If you lose a jig, it's $5, whatever, it's $5. But, get something like that. You learn the action, learn the technique first. Watch the videos online. There's a million videos that are online. Johnny Jigs has a ton of them out there. Shimano has a ton of them out there. Even going as far as like looking at like Shimano, like Southeast Asia or Shimano Japan. A lot of those, well, the Southeast Asia, they're in English, but the Japanese ones are not. But there's like, if you look at like Hiroto Yamamoto, he's with Shimano Japan. Fantastic videos about technique. And you can see, all right, oh, I need to put the rod under my forearm. Oh, when he hooks up, it's under his armpit. He's fighting off the reel. And then just kind of work on it. It takes time to get that technique. It's a little bit awkward at first, but once you're going to reprogram that muscle memory, and you'll be better off in the long run.
No, super great one. Or if you want to get two birds, one stone, you can watch Benny fish with Johnny Jigs, and then you go through the entire process for it. I've watched that one a bunch of times because they do a really good job of you showing technique and whatnot for it. So I think a lot of us are YouTube warriors where we've watched a ton of it, and so it's just trying to implement that into actual action for it. So I guess another one is, okay, so you've got people that you've been out there who fished for years. What are some of the things that people that are more experienced that are doing that they're still probably have bad habits or whatnot for it? Not just newbies. I'm assuming if you do something long enough, you still have a bad habit if it's never corrected.
Yeah. The biggest, the folks that have been doing it the longer times, often the biggest thing I'll see is just not being organized. And it might be a surprise, but I think being organized is really key. You don't want to be fumbling through a bag to try to find your stuff, right? So everything that I have is I usually roll out with a backpack. I've got my the backpack that I always go out with. In the back pocket here are my hooks, my terminal tackle, my PR knot system, and I keep those all like this. Hang on a second. So like, for instance, my hooks, they're all organized in a box. Goes in my bag, right? These are my double hook rigs. These are my single hook rigs. All organized in my bag. I know exactly where they are. I have a jig roll or two that I'll have, all my jigs in there. I'll usually organize them by the type of jig. So I'll have like, a sardine waver in different weights and colors. I'll have a shimmer fall in different weights and colors, maybe some gangster sticks. And just have that organization. I think that organization is really key to just, it's very cumbersome. You got a lot of stuff going on. You got hooks flying around. You don't need to worry about where your stuff is. So organization, I think that's really important.
I learned that a ton. I was on the Johnny Jigs bluefin tuna trip last week, and that was the biggest thing I took away is not having to dick around trying to find stuff because the bite might move, you might drift, and then the more frustrating is you're watching other people hook in around you, and then you get more frustrated trying to find stuff. And like we discussed, when you're competitive, you hate seeing other people catch fish when you're not.
Yeah.
And so it just kind of amps you up. And then if you just have everything organized, you're able to kind of calm down, get your stuff quickly, get tied on, and then get back out for it. Or you don't rush trying to make up time by doing half-ass knots or leader. So you're trying to make up time of you finding stuff by rushing the back end of everything.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's move into another one. This is the big one. Everybody keeps asking about rods, right? Because that's the big one too. Is because of slow pitch jigging is so new here that there's not a lot of availability to go into a lot of stores and pick up these rods and kind of play with them for it. So a lot of it's watching YouTube, watching you guys on YouTube videos for it, or reading reviews for it. So how do you choose your rod? Like rod length, spiral versus or straight wrap, like stuff like that for your guides. Like just kind of some tips on that.
All right. So what I look for in a rod is a couple of things. So one is construction. Two is action. My cat might make a guest appearance soon. Sorry.
Can't be worse than my thunderstorm. So my thunderstorms beat your cat. So.
So I look for rod construction, rod action, a length generally. The length is not as important, but I'll kind of go into that in a minute. So rod construction. So I want a high quality blank. I look for a blank that is a very high carbon content. I look for a blank that doesn't twist. So like for instance, company man stuff, Shimano has high power X on their rods, to a certain extent. When I first started fishing, I'm like, God, what is this stuff? But it's this carbon crossweave that goes down the rod. It stops the rod from twisting. Okay, so that off-axis fight that you have, it doesn't twist on your guides. It makes it a lot better for you to fish. I think that a slow, even recoil is the best action that you can have. Okay. The reason why I prefer very slow recoil is because that allows me as the angler to do what I want the rod to do. It's not going to get away from me. It's not going to recoil too quickly. You're not going to get a lot of those, foul ups where the bottom of the jig, the hooks get on your leader. But you can manipulate that bait to do what you want it to do in the water. So that slow, even recoil is really important. I like conventional guides on top of the rod, just straight regular conventional guides. Oftentimes the spiral wrap, a lot of folks say, oh, it stops the tip wraps, but the answer to that is just pay attention, right? Just pay attention, follow that slack line down with your tip, and you're going to minimize any kind of tip wraps that you have. But having that on top, I find it's just better. Usually the spiral wrap rods, they're really just masking an inferior blank. Oftentimes, sometimes they're not. But if you look at any high-end Japanese manufacturer, whether you look at Shimano, their Infinity series that they have in Japan, you look at Deep Liner, you look at Garage Nagi, Evergreen, C4, any of those major Japanese rods, none of them are spiral wrapped, right? None of them are spiral wrapped. So it's just a better layout, I think, for what we're doing.
So we're kind of leading this. I know you were kind of hinting at it for it. So when you do a head boat, like when you do the AP or the Yankee Cap versus a private boat, are you using a different length rod or using the same rods for each? Like, do you mix it up at all or the same for both?
So years ago, I developed that Innovate rod with Temple Reef, and that was really designed for head boats to keep that line away from the boat. The downside of the rod is the further away your jig is from you, essentially, the longer the rod is, the longer that lever that you're using, the harder that is to work in deeper water, right? So you have the benefit of keeping the line away from the boat. You get the negative of it's a little bit more work. So what I find is kind of like the 6 to 7 foot is usually the sweet spot for rods. Shorter rods are easier to work, heavier jigs in deeper water. They are usually a little bit what we call punchier, a little faster action than a longer rod. But I also kind of look at rod length anyway for species that I'm targeting. So if you have a rod that's a little bit longer, so like a 6'6" to 6'10", let's say, that's going to give you a broader sweep and more of a longer fall that you're going to get. So you're going to have more action on your jig for a longer period of time. Whereas and those are better for your bottom species, your groupers, your snappers, things like that, the delicious stuff. The shorter rods are better in deeper water, or if you're targeting faster swimming fish. So your jacks, your kingfish, your, tuna, things like that. So it really kind of depends on what you're doing, but that's really around the area what I would look for.
Okay, that's a big thing everybody's been asking here for, because it seems like if you look at it, all these like super long rods came out, and then we've seen like a swing to these really short rods, and so these like 5'10", and so with just so much on the market, it's always hard to know what to go with, because like you said, everybody's trying to jump on it too. So there might be a lot of product out there that people are looking at that they're just we don't know enough about.
A lot of the trend is shorter, but that they really. The problem is if you mentioned before, if I'm fishing from a bigger boat, I still would want to have something that's, at least 6.5, 6'6" at least, to fish on those, just because you are dealing with a gunnel, you're dealing with, a big keel of the boat that's way far down. It helps you. The shorter rods, if you're fishing from a private boat, may be better especially for the deeper water. It makes it a little bit easier on you, but like I said, like that 6 foot to 6'6", 6'10", somewhere in there is what you're looking for.
Do you have any pros or cons, like with two-piece rods? I know that's good for transportation or whatnot, but do you see it affecting action or fishing or whatnot when you go to two-piece versus single?
No, the two-piece rods, in my experience with two-piece rods, have been, there's been no issues at all whatsoever with two-piece rods. They're usually butt jointed. I've never had any kind of a butt joint fail. It makes it a lot easier to travel with. Especially if you're going international and you got a rod tube that's 7 feet, hauling that through Miami International Airport's not fun. I've done that many times. But the two-piece versus one-piece, I don't really see necessarily a difference in the action. Most of the action in these rods is still going to be above the butt section of the rod anyway, from that from where that rod meets up. It's going to still be parabolic. It's still going to bend all the way through. You're not going to have any issues with that. I have no problem with two-piece rods versus one piece. Makes no difference.
I guess the last question before we put like the whole rod section to bed. So you're somebody coming in and you're a beginner. We have a lot of beginners asking for questions for it. What do you think are good like beginner rods, intermediate, and then I guess more expertise rods that you would suggest that aren't going to break the bank, but you're not going to get so mad that you're going to want to buy something else because you're like, I should have spent a little bit more and got something nicer.
Yeah, so with what I use for Shimano, I think the grappler is probably the best bang for the buck that you can get out there. It's got a lot of the high end features of like the game series. So you got your high power X, spiral X core, so it's very strong core. Doesn't twist at all. The only thing that they did was kind of don't have quite as good of a reel seat. It's the same Fuji. It's a Fuji reel seat, but it's not as ergonomic as like the CI Plus. Then step up from that is the game series. So the grappler is about 300, game series is about 420, and those are 6'6". Those are what I use pretty much anywhere else. Now, if you go to the ultra high level, there's stuff in Japan. There's the Infinity series, things like that. Deep liner rods are fantastic. The new Jig Pro rods that came out, very good rods. I know the folks that worked on those and tested those, and I very much trust their opinion in terms of those rods. I think they came out with the Tribute this year, which is like their flagship model, which I think that was really cool that they put the time and effort to do something like that. Then there's your other high-end rods like your Evergreen Poseidons, which are fantastic rods. I mean, absolutely unbelievable rods, but they are very technical, very, very technical. So that's a different level of thinking about this than what the average Joe. So I don't know if that's the rod for most people, but when you get into that super high end stuff, when you start living and breathing slow pitch, you're going towards that way, especially those new OSHA limited, OSHA Infinity limiteds that are out there with Shimano. Those things are unbelievable. But like I said, super technical rods.
I'm a little afraid to get those for it. I feel like the rod outfishes me for it. I gotta like upgrade to be able to like make sure that my rod isn't like 6 steps better than I am for it.
Yeah, you
All
can
right,
grow.
so I guess it's good for it. All right, so moving into like the other one that we get a big one for is like obvious one is reels. That's one of the big things I've noticed here is that reels make a big difference for weight and stuff like that for it. But when I go into local shops around here, there's none you can handle. Like I can't pick them up for a lot of them and test them out. It's more limited, so you're buying based on like videos, reviews, or your buddies telling you what they've got for it. How do you go about picking your reels for it? Like, I guess like
So,
lever versus star drag and just all stuff like that for it. Like, what are you looking for? Like, what stands out?
so generally speaking, I'm looking for something that's going to have between 38 inches per crank on the low end, 46 inches per crank on the high end, roughly. All right. Anything faster than that is a little bit too fast. Anything lower than that is a little bit too slow. That's kind of the sweet spot in terms of retrieve. And what I break that up is how deep am I fishing, right? So if I'm fishing, let's say 300, 350 and under, I can get away with a power gear system that's going to have, a little bit less retrieve because I'm still going to be able to make the action that I want to make. 6 inches of fall isn't going to make the biggest bit of difference, but it is going to give you more torque. So if you have harder fighting fish, bigger fish like gag group or things like that, I like having a bit more torque. In terms of lever versus star, that's really a personal preference thing, right? So you're going to have different benefits with one versus the other. So for instance, like this is OSHA 2000, right? Benefit of the star drag is auto engage. You can engage it real easy, tactile feel on here, thin, narrow spool, so it's easy to control. The downside to a star drag is that it's not going to put out as something this size is not going to put out as much drag as an equivalent lever drag usually, right? But what I look for in the reel is effective drag, right? I don't care if the thing puts out 50 pounds of drag. A lot of these companies you'll see, max 84 kg. You can't even pick that up. It's ridiculous. And also, how did they measure that drag? Did they measure it at an empty spool? So your drag is 3 times what it would be if you had a full spool on there, so it's kind of like false marketing. Whereas something like, like a 4000, an OSHA 4000, this one puts out a legit 40 pounds of drag. It's a beast, they designed this thing to fish for big tuna or really deep water. In terms of lever drag stuff, though, I've been fishing these guys. These are the new OSHA lever drags. So I've been fishing these. I was really fortunate to be testing these since about September of last year before they were in production. So my marching instructions were beat the hell out of it and don't wash it. And I did that. So I've been fishing these for a while. Now, the thing with the lever drag is you don't get that auto engage, right? It just can't happen with this. But this reel in particular, it has the new Infinity drive system in it. So that's 2 drag washers here on the A side of the reel, the handle side of the reel, sandwiching over here. So it's doubling essentially the effective drag. So when you're under load, dissipates the heat better. 44 pounds of drag on this thing. But again, goes back to the effective drag. How much am I really asking this reel to do? I want a reel to have effectively somewhere between like 12 to, let's say 15 to 17 pounds of drag is really all you need for most stuff. There's very few fish that you're going to go for, unless you're going for big tuna, things like that you're going to need more drag. And the way I look at it is, one, I can count on one hand how many times I've had to push past strike in a situation, right? Because I have hands and my hands have fingers. And this is 4 pounds of pressure and this is about 4 pounds of pressure. So I can use my hand as educated pressure on the spool to get the drag that I need and not have to go past strike on it, right? So with a reel like this, it's lever drag, so I have a little bit different way that I fish it because I don't have that auto engage on there. So usually when I'm dropping on these reels, you can see that here is, the lever goes across the top. What I usually do is I'll fish it like this, so that way as the fish hits, I'm engaging and pushing forward at the same time. So if it speeds up my uptake on it. I don't have to do fumble around with my lever on something like this. But again, effective drag over these wild claims of max drag. I really like smooth reels. Smooth drag is critical. If you're using light line, you don't want to have jerky drag on there because those jerks on there are what's going to cause you to pop. You don't want to have that happen. So smooth drag is key. Smooth handle, good water intrusion protection on it. So like something like this has what's called X-Protect. It's like a labyrinth inside of it. So it takes a lot for salt water to get inside these reels. Other reels that are out there don't have the same level of protection. So you wind up losing bearings pretty frequently in them. Or it takes a long time for the gears themselves to smooth out over time with those reels. Downside is, some other reels that are out there are a little bit lighter. It doesn't really, the whole setup still weighs 2 pounds, so you're still fine. It's not a weight issue for me.
So I guess the last question on those 4 too, because that was one that came up in our group. I know they told you not to wash them down or maintenance them, but what are you usually doing after a trip? Like, how are you maintaining your reels and rods and whatnot for it to kind of keep them effective for the next
Yes.
trips or whatnot for it?
After every trip, I'll wipe down my rods. I'll spray down the rods. I'll usually just wipe them down. Sometimes I'll use like a protect spray, like a rod and reel cleaner kind of spray. On the reels, I do something a little bit different. So the reels, what I do is go into my sink. They got the faucet coming down. The first thing I do is just kind of wash off everything, make sure that I get inside this area here because that's where you get a lot of salt buildup in that little grommet on the bottom. I open up the bail and I just let the water run on the back part of the spool here and just let it sit and just push the spool backwards in free spool. And that'll help get water down into your braid and get the salt that's built up, especially if you've been out there in deeper water where you've been down further in the spool. Get that salt out of there so you don't get that built up corrosion underneath. Fresh water is not going to hurt these things. Okay, they're built for salt water. They're anodized for salt water. Having a freshwater rinse down, soaking this thing with the bail open is not going to harm them. So just really thoroughly wash them down. What I like to do is give them a quick towel dry and then just put them out on a towel on the counter. Let them kind of air dry. Any kind of water will seep out of there. Once they're fully dry, usually like overnight, then I'll put them back in the bag. Sometimes I'll use that rod and reel cleaner on them to spray them down real quick so that way you don't get any corrosion.
Okay, perfect. So I guess kind of moving into, I know everybody's kind of expecting, this is the one that I've gotten a ton on, is jig selection. And I know this is probably, you get hammered the most about it. And so this is the one that I got asked to ask dramatically for, was, do you think color, glow, or profile is most important when picking jigs?
Action,
Action.
action. I don't think profile of the jig. I mean, it matters, yeah. But what I'm looking for is the right jig for that day. Okay, so what works one day might not work another day. A lot of things that a lot of times people don't. I would venture to say most people don't think that jigs will spook fish, right? If you've ever been on a dock and you drop something down, there's a bunch of fish there. What's the first thing that happens when that jig hits the water? They kind of run away often, right? So you don't want to use something that's going to spook them. I mean, that's just going to come over time. You'll learn kind of what's going on there. But usually what I do is, in terms of jig selection, is, and I'll back up one step. I think one of the most important things that separates a good jig fisherman from an okay one is jig selection. Okay, and making those adjustments throughout the day and throughout the time on the water to get the right jig. So what I usually do, I pull up to a spot. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drop a jig that I know how it's going to perform in neutral conditions. Okay, so I drop that jig down. I'm not necessarily convinced this is the right one. Usually, it's something that is weight appropriate for where I'm at. So let's say, I'll give you a hypothetical, right? I'm in 250 feet of water, right? And I have minimal current. So I'll probably pick a 170-gram jig, give or take. I'll usually drop this one first. This is a shimmer fall. I've caught a lot of fish on these. I know that they work. I know how they're going to perform in neutral conditions. I drop this down. If this jig drops like a rock and goes straight to the bottom, well, maybe I can lighten up my weight on it, right? If it scopes out immediately, well, now I know that I need a heavier jig. So next one is going to be a heavier version of one of these. Okay, cool. I have a heavier version, so I grab a 210. I got the 210. All right, now up and down. Okay, so I know where my weight is generally with this particular jig. The next thing I'm going to do is start working on action. So that's going to be varying whether I'm going to start doing kind of longer fall actions, see if the fish are really receptive to jigs that way. Sometimes fish are not receptive to slow moving action. Sometimes they want something a little faster. So then I'll mix up my techniques a lot in the beginning, a lot. And I'll also change jigs out very, very frequently in the beginning. Kind of going at that same concept of, all right, I know how this jig is going to perform in the water. I know roughly the weight that I should be at. Do I want it to be faster? So maybe I'll drop a little bit lighter jig that's a little bit skinnier and longer and get that punchy action on it. Will I drop something that's wider, fatter, heavier to get that up and down without and purposely overload the rod to get a slower presentation on it? And then I just start working with actions, right? So I'll start with a very slow kind of a cadence. Usually when I first roll up to a spot, first thing that I'll do, drop down. I'll pull that jig up about 20 cranks at kind of a one pitch, 1, 2, 3, 4, just like that. Usually the larger, more dominant fish, if they're really on that day, they'll hit a faster moving thing. I've learned that with gags, particularly red snapper too. They tend to get real aggressive on jigs often. Then sometimes if they're not active, sometimes you just have to almost dead stick it. You're barely bumping this thing with the tip of your rod, right? Barely moving this thing in the water, just along the bottom. Sometimes that works too. So it's kind of a combination of all things. And again, it goes back to that time on the water, right? So just because there's a million jigs in the store doesn't mean that a million jigs are for you or for your fishery. It's really important to know, like, let's say 5 jigs, 5 shapes of jigs. You got one that's wider and fatter, like a sardine waver, right? You got one that's narrow, skinny, and falls a little faster. Really understand what those are doing. Take the time, drop it off the side of the boat, and just kind of mess with it. See what the different actions happen in the water. Well, if I go fast like this, what happens with the jig? If I go really slow, what happens with the jig? Sometimes take the damn hooks off. Just put it in the water and see what happens with that jig with no influence on it at all, right? See how it's supposed to swim. Then put hooks on one side, put hooks on the other side. See how it affects the jig. Take your time with it. I mean, I get it. Time's out there is limited. You want to catch fish, fully understand. But when you're learning, those things will add up so that over time, you'll be a much more consistent fisherman with this, and you'll be able to kind of adapt to the different conditions of the day.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that was one of the questions I had later was like, how does a newbie get into like learning action or whatnot? Well, that was one of the things like, how can somebody practice when they're not out there, like in a pool or like a lake or a pond or anything like that, just trying to practice? That's one of the questions I was going to ask later on. So you kind of beat me to the point on that one for it. So,
Yeah.
and so I guess another one on it. You said you're switching jigs. How often are you switching jigs? How long are you giving a jig before you're like, let's mix it up, let's see what they want, moving on to the next?
2 drops. Yeah, I'll give it 2 drops, and if it's not doing what I want it to do, I'll switch. So when I get first to a spot, I'll switch jigs out like a crazy person. I've said that a million times in my seminars, and it's really just to try to get dialed into what they're looking for. And then you mentioned before, do I look for colors? Do I look for those kind of things? I really think that when UV light reflects off of a jig, I think that's really important. Actually, let me see if I have where's my flashlight? It's got to be somewhere around here. Yeah, I'll try to look around and find it. Hang on one second.
And everybody who's like tuning in, if y'all have any questions too, that when we're going through this, feel free to put them at the bottom and we can cover them through. Like I'm looking at all the notes and seeing everybody kind of call in. So if you got any questions for Benny as well, feel free to type them out and we'll see if we can drop them in as well.
All right. So when I talk about UV reflective stuff, so UV flashlight, and you can't really see too well, but even the part that's not glow, like that pink on there, see how it's reflecting the UV light on it, or something like this, how that's reflecting all that UV light, whereas one of these on the top, it doesn't really reflect any UV light, but on the bottom side, you can see it reflects it there. That UV light is key, I think. I find that jigs that reflect UV in some way, so a lot of times even like your oranges, things like that, that UV reflective nature of them, usually you wind up getting probably 4 to 1 bites as to jigs that don't. And I don't necessarily mean that it glows, because they're eating fish that don't glow, right? They're down there. So that UV reflective is important. I also find that the sky is important. So if you have a bluebird day, use something that's a little bit more reflective. Sometimes that reflection will trigger things to come after it. If it's a darker day, you want to create a better silhouette. So you go to a little bit darker colors, something like a gold like this, as opposed to like a bright silver like that. So keep that in mind.
So what's your opinion then? Let's say because we got to look at the visible light spectrum. So it's under 350 feet. Colors are a little bit more easier to see and whatnot. When they go deeper, when you're fishing past that 600-foot mark, what is your determination when picking jigs? That necessarily like the colors and everything kind of disappear that length for it, or that depth? Is anything different of how you're going with jigs when you go deeper?
Other than the weight of them, not really, because like I said, I'm keyed into this 5-6 shapes, right? So I don't have a whole lot of variability I don't like rolling out with a bag that has 50 different jig styles. It just doesn't make sense, because at that point you have like analysis paralysis, right? You have too much choices. You can't. You're like, oh, what do I do? Something's going to bite the jig. Oftentimes there'll be some days they'll be keyed into one particular shape. Like one day they'll really want like a sardine waver, or they'll really want a shimmer fall. They really want like a sea flapkin S impact, whatever they are. But for the most part, when you go deep, you're still using those same shapes, and it's still kind of the same color principles of it. I find that the deeper that you go, the dumber the fish get generally. And as long as there's something moving, they're going to attack it. So it's not necessarily as important when you're deeper, as long as you're able to get down into that strike zone well and have something that's effectively moving down there.
So do you think when newbies I'm just saying, like, I consider myself still a newbie for it. I've only been with less than a year and a half for it. So I think still many more years before I become more experienced for it. Do you think newer fishermen don't slow their jig down enough when it hits bottom and it scares stuff away? They just let it hit and then it scares stuff off for it? Or do you think that makes a difference?
Yeah, I think that whole idea, kind of like the old mutton snapper fishermen in South Florida, it's like, you got to leave that sinker on the bottom. You're going to spook they don't give a shit. They don't care. Bang that jig on the bottom. My jig is hitting bottom every, once it gets to the bottom, it's hitting bottom. And, it might hit bottom 5 times in a drift, 6 times in a drift, and I don't think that's necessarily gonna spook the fish. And oftentimes, if you've seen cameras of underwater fish, well, obviously they're underwater fish, but underwater cameras of fish, oftentimes when that weight or that jig hits the bottom, sometimes they'll come to that because it's sound. It's they pick it up on their lateral lines. It's something moving that's not there, and oftentimes they'll kind of inspect with their mouth. So the hitting bottom often, I don't think that really matters, at least in my experience.
Okay, because I've seen some people when they're like spear fishing, they have like those croaker or the grouper calls, whatever for it. That's what it reminded me of for when they're making that noise for it. I didn't know if that kind of was similar for it.
Yeah,
Oh, that's good.
as your hooks are banging around in there, they're making sound. It's making sound. It's making sound.
Okay, jumping through some of these. All right, another one we get asked a ton, and this is a big topic for everybody. It's braid size and leaders. So I guess that's another one that goes hand in hand with the jigs for it. Most people are running anywhere between 15 to 30, and everybody is a huge proponent of you need to run either 20. I'm a diehard 20, or you can do 30. What is your view on braid size and leader?
Okay, so I've tested a lot of lines. I go to there's a tackle store here that has a line breaker on it. I've got some folks that are at IGFA that also have obviously they have a very good testing machine at IGFA. But I want to know, I want to have the thinnest possible line with the highest breaking strength, and there's limits to that as well. So what I find is that 20 pound, like you said, 20-pound Power Pro is what I use primarily. I used to use 30 a little bit more than I use now. I probably use 20 pretty much across the board. So you'll see that how my reels are set up. Like every one of them on the bottom will have something like this that'll have my Power Pro 20 on it, or like this one will say Max Quattro 20. So I know that this is a thinner diameter than this one. So all of my reels will have those markings on the bottom. So when they're in my bag, I know exactly what I'm taking out. I like 4-carrier line. I prefer 4-carrier line, and from my experience, 4-carrier line is going to stay vertical better than 8-carrier line. Braid does float. I think that you have, with 8 carriers on there, just kind of the same concept as like, why do you chew food? To create more surface area, right? So your saliva can get to it. The more surface area that you have on that braid with like an 8-carrier, I find that it tends to scope out a bit more. So like the Power Pro, the 20, it's a 4-carrier line. I prefer a rougher line. So doesn't matter what line brand it is. I like a line that is a little bit rougher, and the reason why is for that PR knot. I find that it digs in better on your fluoro. So going from your braid to your fluoro, it's going to make a better connection in there. Now we're going to talk about our leaders, right? So for my fluoro, I've been using AFCO Psycho Pro fluoro since it came out, before it came out actually, onto the market. It's made by Sunline. Before I used the AFCO stuff, I used Sunline FC100 fluoro. I find that like 50 pound is kind of the sweet spot in fluoro, but I like a hard fluoro. So similarly, I like, just like my braid is a little bit rougher, I like a hard fluoro that it's going to dig in, but it's still going to be strong enough that it's not going to dig in too much and weaken the fluoro overall. So usually my stuff is 50 or 60 pound leader, depending on what I'm fishing for or where I'm fishing. But 50 pound is usually the sweet spot for it.
I think I hope that a lot of guys for because that's the big thing is some people are like, you can get away with 30 because a lot of people are afraid of grouper rocking them for it. So I've seen people switch to that. Everybody goes for 20 because people are super worried about getting scoped out
Right.
when you go in deeper for it because a lot of stuff we have to fish is further out so it's deeper. So that's the big debate for it. And then,
All right. So we'll that for a second before we move on. Right. So a lot of folks, they struggle with the idea of dropping down to 20-pound braid because mentally they think that that's a problem. It's just there's something about dropping down to 20-pound line that people are like, that's a little light, right? 20-pound braid in a straight pull breaks at 36 to 41 pounds, right? And I mentioned before about effective drag, right? So I'm fishing 15 pounds of strike, roughly, for the most part, 15, 17 pounds of strike. I can have my reel locked on an OSHA 2,000, right? This thing puts out 23 pounds of drag. I can have it locked with 20-pound braid, and it ain't gonna break. I can anchor the damn boat with it, right? Same thing with 20-pound, on one of these. It puts out 44 pounds of drag, but I'm not putting 44 pounds of drag on the fish. You couldn't even hold it at that point. Braid breaks in a straight. The braid does not break in a straight pull for the most part. Unless you have some kind of nick in your line or whatever. But for the most part, it's going to break from abrasion. And I don't care, 30 pound, 20 pound. If it's under tension and you're in the rocks, you've lost the fight. It's done.
Yeah.
Right? I think the biggest thing is your leader size. I think the biggest thing is the leader dropping down to, if some people want to drop down to a 30-pound leader, I would highly advise against that, because that is what is going to be your abrasion resistance, right? You're going to have 12 to 15 feet of a leader. I just saw a comment pop up about, what length of a leader. I use a very scientific kind of 3 or 4 wingspans as I'm pulling it off the spool. That usually is about as much. And if you're 15 feet into the rocks, it's done. You've lost. So
You beat me to my next question. That was the length of leader. I was curious for it, because what length are usually you rolling with your leaders for it?
Yeah, usually I start out with about 12 to 15 feet of leader. I like that mostly because tying the PR isn't super easy. It's one of the reasons why I roll with so many different reels. All of them are set up a little bit differently for different conditions, but that'll give you enough leader on there that you can retie several times. Recently, I've been tying the FG knot, not the FG, the AG chain knot a lot. Recently, I don't know if you guys have seen Chad Boussier, Bougere. I learned how to pronounce his last name properly recently. I always called him Boussier, but anyway, Chad is a fantastic jig fisherman, one of the best. And he came out with this tool. I don't know if you all seen it.
I don't think I have.
This one to tie the AG chain knot. So the AG chain knot needs to be tied under tension, and this tool allows you to use these rubber grommets to keep the proper tension on your terminal tackle. So it comes out. I have one over here, so you can kind of see. It'll come out in a chain like that, and this is going to be 100% knot as well, right? So, I'm trying to get it in focus there. So yeah, so you can see that if you tie this knot properly, this thing is a beast. It gives you a little bit more protection on your main line, the main part of your fluoro as well, in terms of abrasion resistance. But this thing is 100% knot. This thing makes it super easy to tie. So highly recommend. I don't know if he still has them available. I know he just made a first run on them. But that thing is it's one of those ideas that's like, why didn't I think of that? It's simple, but it's perfect for what you're doing.
And that was one of the questions that somebody asked, is where they could get that tool. So I think you just answered that one for it.
Yeah, get them from him directly, I think. You can probably check out his Facebook page. He probably has something, or you can send him a message to get something like that.
So I guess the lead into this one is in hooks. I know you helped us in the other. I had the question, or my cousin did the other day, about choosing hook size for, and that's a big one for it too. Is how do you know the correct length of hook, and then I guess the hook size too, 5, 6, 3/0. Trying to figure out that, and then we can lead into like you kind of doing the 5/10s and 6/10s. But what is your determination when you're picking your hook sizes?
So hook size for me is going to depend on several different factors. So first is the actual strength of the hook itself, right? 2 is going to be the hook size. So hook size is kind of like how braid diameter is across manufacturers. Even in the same manufacturer, you can have a 3/0 hook for jigging is the same size as a 7/0 live bait hook, right? I don't know why there's no standard for hook sizes, but in the hooks that I use, I generally use for my double hook rigs. So let me show you.
I learned that the hard way. I've ordered a lot of hooks online, and then I put them next to each other, and I'm like, you are completely different. And I bought some, I'm like, I'm probably never going to use these. These are monstrous, and they're labeled as like 3s.
Right. So these are the 510 hooks. I've been using these for years and years and years in terms of making my own doubles. So I like these for a couple of reasons. First of all, they're tin, so they're fairly light hooks, but they're very, very, very strong hooks. You can see that it's a fairly narrow gap here. I don't like a wide gap in my hook. What happens with wide gaps, I find, is two things. One, wide gaps are stickier in terms of, yes, you'll get more hookups, but oftentimes that wider gap will also get stuck in the bottom, and it won't be as secure of a hook set when you come up. So whether it's a hook like this, it's going back towards the shank quite a bit as opposed to being more vertical, or even something like this, which is these are 620s. See, it's a tuna blade style hook, so it's coming back kind of like that 60-degree angle towards the shank, right? I find that a slow taper on the hook is really critical. So whether it's this one has a very slow taper, this one very slow taper. It's easier to make a puncture into something with something that's very skinny as opposed to something that's wide. So oftentimes you'll see hook manufacturers have a wider tip on that. And these rods are not hook setting machines. You want to have as easy penetration as possible. The reason why I like these is because the belly part of them, and this is why the slow taper is important, that belly part of them is still very strong. So once you do get that penetration, that hook is in here, this thing's not going to bend out, right? It's not going to bend out when it's in there. Same with these guys. It still is a fairly meaty hook in the shank and the lower portion, but once it's in there, it's in there. Okay, so I like the 510s because they have an outward facing barb, less foul ups on your jigs. This one doesn't have it, but is what it is. In terms of length, you just want to make sure that your hooks, when they are hooked up, that they don't overlap in the middle. Okay, there's varying technical sides of it in terms of, do you want to have hooks that are all right, since we're here, let's talk about it. So most of the jigs they're asymmetrical, right? So you see those asymmetrical, but it's not perfectly asymmetrical. Usually they're flat over here. They have a bulbous side on the bottom. Most of the time they're slightly center weighted or more towards the tail a little bit. So you can get away with having a little bit longer hooks in the back, like 2/3 of the length of the jig over here versus 1/3 of the length up here, and that still keeps it balanced in the water as it's going to fall. Do you have to get that technical with it? No. The biggest thing is that they don't overlap in the middle. If they overlap in the middle, you're going to have a bad time because they're going to get fouled up in the middle. And what's going to happen is your jig's going to be down there. Anyone who's had a jig foul up like that, you feel, oh, there's something small on there. It's kind of acting wonky. And then you reel up from 400 feet and your hooks are like this in the center. And you're like, what? It just wastes your time. So that's a huge thing.
I think we're all guilty of that, especially at the beginning when you're trying to figure it out. And then it's the crank of shame, I call it, because you think you have a small fish and you just keep cranking, knowing that you're going to have to fix it when it comes up.
Yeah.
So I got another question for you. How do you decide doubles versus singles?
So I like doubles pretty much like 350 and under. I find that it doesn't have, usually the reason why is because the singles are heavier. They're larger gauge, they're heavier. They're going to have a little bit more influence on the jig itself, right? So if the jig is a heavier jig, you have something that's, a 400-gram jig, something like this, you can have a lot bigger hook on here. And I prefer a bigger single on these types of jigs, particularly for deep water, because you're going to get a more secure hook set in the mouth. Oftentimes you'll find it just buried right in the mouth of the fish, and it's a really secure hook set. When you're using smaller jigs, smaller profile jigs, I like using the doubles. And I mentioned before the construction of those Gamakatsu 510s. They're tin, so they're light, and they're not going to influence the action of the jig too much. The biggest thing that I see newbies doing is just putting too much shit on their hooks. Like, stop with the tinsel. You don't need tinsel. It's actually a parachute. It does nothing to attract the fish to you. Do you think that the linchpin of catching a fish is that is attacking something that is not a fish, has multiple hooks flying around on it, and is attached to another piece of line? That tinsel on your hook is going to make you catch the fish? Definitely not, right? The only time I've seen it have any kind of influence is in micro jigs when you're fishing for really small stuff in very shallow water. Kind of the same concept as like a sabiki rig, right? But bigger stuff, that extra crap on your hooks, it doesn't do anything for you. Even if you buy them prepackaged and they come that way, just cut the shit off. It doesn't help you. It's gonna make you scope more. You're gonna influence the action of the jig and how it's intended to work. So that would be my 2 cents on that.
No, I love that one because I immediately know what you're talking about. Like we've all seen them, right? I've seen the basic ones, like I've tied my own, and then you see somebody who's made one, or you buy them and it has either squid stuff on them, or it's got
Which
feathers and all kinds of stuff, and you're like,
like
cool.
yeah, you're like the squid skirts
Yeah.
kill me. I mean, don't get me wrong. I've done it in the past. I have. That's one thing I want to say is like, I'm speaking from this like holier thou than thou position, but I've done all that stuff. I've made all these mistakes along the way. I've messed up more times than anyone on this call, right? Ever. And you have to learn from those. So I think it's super critical to kind of embrace the not understanding stuff
Mhm.
in the beginning and just be humble about it and just say, look, I'm learning, right? There's no big deal. I'm learning this stuff. If you use these squid teasers on there, try not. Just see what happens if you don't. I guarantee there's not going to be any less hookups that are on there.
I'm laughing because I'm guilty. You said it a minute ago. Don't have a million different types of jigs in it, and I was just thinking of my jig roll, and I'm just like, I would be embarrassed to pull it out for you because you'd be like, you have a billion. And I've talked to my cousin about this that you have so many options that you don't give enough time to see if it actually works or you've got some that you paid for that you don't have enough time to get to because you're chasing this new jig. I need this new thing. I got to see what somebody else for. And then you spent thousands of dollars in jigs and you're like, I haven't even given them all a chance. Like I didn't even see if they worked or not. And so then I got a bag full of stuff that has what if potential.
Right. So I did inventory not too long ago. I have over 800 jigs at my house. Right. So I have more jigs than probably any tackle store in the country. And the thing is, I know what all of them do in the water for sure. I have multiples of multiples of multiples of different jigs. But like I said, it's really just important to kind of narrow it down just for your own sanity while you're out there. It's not, the amount of times that I've been out there and only one jig was working, I can count it on one hand. And this is hundreds of, if not thousands of times on the water where, it's going to work. Just get it dialed where you know what those jigs are doing. That's the most important thing. The jigs that are super erratic and that, they fall so wildly that not even you know where they're going to go, that ain't helping anybody, right? It's just not, in order for you to be good at doing this, you need to know what your stuff is doing. And I think that's important.
So I guess the question that everybody asks for it, do you think there's any jig profiles or falls or shapes that are species specific for it? Like you go out there and you know it's queens, you're gonna grab this from the bag. You're looking for grouper, you're gonna go with this from the bag.
Not really.
I had to
No.
ask it. It's been in the questions for it, so it's one of those that I had
The
to ask.
the only thing that I can say is really that cadence thing. Queen snapper are super receptive to jigs. Usually the larger queen snapper are up above the structure, sometimes 70 to 100 feet up over the bottom. Most of the times you're going to get queens on the fall, initial drop, that kind of stuff. The Like gag grouper, they tend to like, of all the grouper, they tend to like something that's faster moving. So in terms of like species specific, it's more the action of the jig as opposed to the type of the jig, right? So they like something that's a little bit fast moving, they'll chase. Whereas something like a red grouper tends to like more fluttery things that are a little bit slower moving. They're just these garbage pails that go get everything. They're not quite as aggressive as other ones. There's certain species of fish that are obviously more apt to hit jigs than other species of fish. Jacks, red snapper, they'll hit jigs usually before a mangrove will, for instance. For whatever reason, in my experience, mangrove snappers have been, I've caught plenty, but not nearly as many as, as like a red snapper or, they're rare and endangered reds, or jacks, things like that. I don't think that a specific jig is going to catch more of a specific species. What I always go back to is what's the right jig for that day,
Okay, that
right?
makes sense. So I guess another question. I have two questions for that. First one, do you think assist cord thickness makes a big difference for it? Like all these jigs that have different assist cords. I see 250, 300, 600. Do you think that has a big difference in the affecting the jigs for it? Should somebody be looking and paying attention to that on their hooks when they go to buy them? If it's too thick, if it's too thin, just kind of stuff like that for it.
Yeah, I think that a lot of, for speed jigging, you can get away with a lot thicker cord just because the action of the jig that you want is going to be faster and you're going to be powering it through the water. With this stuff, I like I don't know if it's necessarily thinner, but kind of going back to what you said, you're giving weights of like you'll have, oh, I've got 250
Yeah.
Kevlar cord or 500 Kevlar. It's the same as line class for, or hook size. You don't know exactly what the diameter is going to be. What I like is what I've used for years and years and years for making my double hook rigs. It's a website called Paracord Planet. I get micro paracord that is, I think it's 100-pound test roughly. That's what they say. It breaks at 100 pounds. It's about this. You can kind of see it. It's not particularly huge diameter. You can get into like the really small stuff. I don't know if you want to go too much smaller than that, but this is kind of, in my opinion, a good balance between strength and it's roughly, it's probably the diameter of like 80-pound fluoro, maybe around that. It's not too much, maybe a little bit bigger than like 80-pound fluoro diameter on there. But you don't want to go too thick. If a lot of times you'll see people using speed jig hooks for slow pitch jigging, and it's too much. There's too much water influence on it.
So another question with your 510s and your 610s. How did you decide on those? Like, there's a ton of options out there for it. Because how did you know to do that, then have to close the eye? I buy the ones you have to close the eye and then bend it back a little bit. So I've tied a ton of those based upon some of the videos that Johnny Jizz recommended you using them and whatnot. And they're reasonably priced. They seem pretty sharp. They got the job done. I was just curious to how you kind of came across those.
So in the beginning, 510 hooks were one of the few hooks that were originally designed to be essentially an assist, and it's either an assist for like a swim bait. So that's why the eyes were open, so you can close them onto a lure. Or what I wound up using them for, kind of repurposed, was to use them as an assist hook for this type of jigging. So I started using those probably, 8-9 years ago, at least. Because I was looking for something that wasn't going, had the profile that I wanted, had the weight that I wanted. And this is, going through a whole bunch of different hooks, using, octopus eye live bait hooks,
Yeah.
or, great eye live bait hooks. What I found by kind of tinkering with that hook placement, the shank versus the point, wide gap versus narrow gap, this 510s checked all the boxes for me, and I started using them a long time ago. And I'm big on, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So that was that. In terms of the singles, the 620 hooks that I use, I like a tuna blade style for my singles. I like that, real aggressive back towards the shank hook. I can show you that profile again. A tuna blade style hook where it's got that back towards the eye. This shape in general, from my experience, is going to get a much better penetration and better hook set in this belly with this narrow gap for any kind of species, whether it's a pelagic or a demersal species.
So going back to the organization part, are you leaving split rings on every one of your hooks? Like I noticed that one had a split ring. And so
Yeah,
just so we see for organization, you have split rings on everything for it. Okay.
every hook. So when I make my hooks, these come pre-rigged. These are the only hooks that I use that are pre-rigged. Every single one of them comes out. I use triple wrapped Wolverine split rings. So let's show you. Pliers over here, but you can kind of see these are triple wrap Wolverine split rings. These are number 4s, so I usually use either number 4 or number 5, depending on size of the hooks overall or kind of target species. I don't really have any issues with them bending out. Always have a good quality of split ring pliers. On Instagram, I put a couple of videos of like the tools that I use, just to show folks kind of what's in my bag.
Me too. I was about to give a shout out to it that you've been doing the videos every day of what's in your bag for. It's been really good material. So y'all check those out. He does a good job of showing tools every day of what he takes with him.
Yeah, so I mean they spread well. They're triple wrap, so don't really have any issues with them unraveling. They work very well in terms of not getting metal fatigue in them. I think that's a lot to do with the split ring pliers too. But these in particular, that's how I have them set up, and all of them are set up with split rings. So I can just go in, grab my split ring, going back to that concept of organization, all my stuff is ready to go when I get out there, all of it. So probably should do it. It makes it easier on you.
No, I like it for it because believe me, it's something we deal with. Is that you grab a hook and then I got to grab a split ring and then grab your split ring pliers, and it's like all of a sudden 10, 15 minutes, and now you're like, oh, I missed the bite.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing we deal with, I've seen people deal with, is your split ring's backing itself off on the swivel. How do you kind of help negate that? Like I've seen people lose jigs for it because their split ring, and maybe it's because their swivel's too small and it's worked its way through the split ring. We've seen that a few times before, where people bring up and the jig's missing, and all they have is basically just their hook and their swivel.
Right. I would say the vast majority of that is operator error. They didn't firmly fix their split ring. They weren't paying attention when they put it on. And what I mean by that is sometimes when you put on a split ring, your split ring may be completely on the jig. The problem is that they don't realize that their actual solid ring from their hooks has somehow managed to get itself wedging that split ring open.
Mm-hmm.
And if you use a standard split ring, like one of the reasons why I like the triple wrap is it gives you an extra layer of protection. If you use a standard double wrap ring, you don't have a whole hell of a lot to go until that comes off.
Yeah.
So usually it's because people didn't pay attention when they were actually putting it on there. I always take that second just to look and make sure that everything is lined up on there. It shouldn't come off. Now, if it does come off, it could be another reason. The split rings suck, and they pulled. For whatever reason, something got bit, and the split ring just spread and went. And that deals sometimes with metal fatigue. Sometimes it's from buying an inferior product. So you've got these multiple single points of failure along your jig, or anywhere. So whether it's your terminal connections, whether it's your split rings, you want to make sure that those connections are right. Most of the time, it's operator error.
Talking about phone on the charger, all of a sudden I realized it was flashing 15%, so not the best thing for it. So sorry about that. I didn't mean to move the phone too much on you. All right, let's keep going through some of these, knock out some more of them. So when you're getting out there, what are you researching before you go out? Like if you know you're going to go fishing, so then you kind of have an idea of what tackle to bring, what jigs, like a game plan. Like what information is critical for you to know so when you go out, you know how to execute and what to select when you're hitting the water?
Multiple weather apps. So I use several weather apps. I'll use Windy. That's number one. I'll use and Windy has, Windfinder. That one has let me down in the past, so this is why I use multiples. Use that. Use the NOAA forecast app. There's different, there's buoy weather, different apps to try to get an idea of what my wave height is going to be in those areas, so that I know how calm or not calm it's going to be, and also how fast the wind is moving. So if I know it's going to be your day out there, that means that the wind is going to be blowing the boat usually, and that's going to cause a faster drift. That means I should probably be using heavier jigs, right? Another great app is Vendusky. Vendusky is a good one for ocean currents. You can pull that up and it'll show roughly what the current is going to be in that particular fishing it. So if you know you're going to be in a spot that has a higher current, even with a low wind day, you can also tackle accordingly. So multiple other apps. Sometimes, talk to the captain. If you're going out there, hey, how was it yesterday? Send a text message. One thing I wouldn't want you to do is to, just crush the guy with text messages, because that's the worst for a captain. Have that, overzealous angler that's like wants to know everything, like it's going to be consistent day to day. It changes. It's the weather. When I pack, I like to have things in kind of like a bell curve, if you will. So if I know I'm primarily going to be fishing in 300 feet of water, the majority of my jigs are going to be in that 250 to 350 gram range, right? It's, or, whatever the conditions are for that particular spot. Sometimes you can get away with less, sometimes more, but most of my jigs are going to be in that range. I'm going to have a couple lighter, I'm going to have a couple heavier. But for terms of like strategy for packing, especially on long range trips, right? That's one of the reasons why I like a boat like the Yankee Caps. I know what I'm getting when I go out there. I know if my trip is going to be roughly in 250 feet of water for the whole time, I can pack a lot more strategically than I can if I'm on a boat that's like, I don't know where we're going, right? and then you have to try to bring the kitchen sink. That's another thing I actually see with inexperienced anglers or novices. They overpack way too much. Way, way, way too much. And now I was guilty of it too back in the day. I've scaled down a lot. I still bring a lot of shit, but I've scaled down quite a bit in terms of my tackle. I find that just being efficient with it makes it easier on you. You're not wheeling like a a duffel bag onto a rolly bag onto the boat. I don't think you really need that
I
anymore.
think your organization was a big thing. Like I just noticed your organization allows you to bring less because it's so well organized that you don't have 6 different things spread out. Having
Right.
split rings on everything just eliminates having to keep additional split rings bag and stuff like that for it. Just kind of allows you to be more organized. So I'm
Yeah.
taking notes the entire time you're going over. So everything you're saying, I'll make sure to write it down.
Good.
So that's a great one for you. So does bottom make a big difference for you? Like when knowing what kind of bottom it is for it, if you're going out there knowing if it's sticky or if it's going to be more coral or if you're doing that, does that make any kind of determination of what you're doing?
No, not really. The only thing that's going to make a difference for is the type of trip that you're going to be on, right? So if you're on a trip in the Gulf where you have long stretches of productive bottom, just kind of limestone bottom, whatever productive live bottom, you're going to be fishing longer. You can fish longer drifts on that. With the advent of things like a spot lock, like a Rodan or Minn Kota or something like that, those allow you to focus really targeted on spots. Like sometimes people will be more rec oriented, or like a particular, like, oh, here's a rock or a feature that I want to be on. But the mistake that I see people make is try to focus too much on just that one spot, right? They don't go around the spot because oftentimes there's fish that hang off of the structure. It doesn't, in terms of my preparation for it, it doesn't make a bit of difference what the bottom is. I don't really care either way. I'm looking for the jig that's going to swim in the water the best. Whatever the bottom is, don't really care. I just think that it's important to take advantage of what the bottom is really doing for you, because, like, for instance, you're fishing deep water for snowies tend to be on the structure itself, whereas yellow edges tend to be around the structure. And kind of bumping your boat around in that area will give you a better opportunity. Make multiple drifts over that spot in different patterns, right? Be able to, if you are in a wreck, let's say it's a barge or something and it's long, go over the front of it, go over the middle of it, go over the back of it. They can be hanging out in different spots, but take advantage of, trying it out. Really, really work that spot. If they're not working, it's not working, move on to the next one.
Do you think people stick on a spot too long? They overfish it for it? Like somebody was telling me, one of the members thinks that if you break off a couple times, you got to move. He's like, grouper gets scared off. If 2 people break off, you're gonna have to move for it. Like you just gonna kill that
Yeah,
fishing spot. You're gonna have to make a move.
yeah. Grouper in particular, I found that if you get a grouper broken off in the bottom, they kind of go down there. And from what I've heard from like diver friends of mine that like commercial divers, they'll kind of grunt when they're down there. It's almost like a warning, like something's wrong. And sometimes that'll shut the bite down if you do have a couple of fish broke off in the same spot. Conversely, there will be days where it just doesn't matter. They're hitting everything, and you can break off a million times and be just fine. But for the most part, if you have multiple breakoffs on a spot, it's probably going to kill the spot. If a shark shows up on the spot, it's probably going to kill the spot. Move on. If you have a lot of toothy stuff that's cutting off all your jigs, move the boat. That's the one thing. They're like, well, should I use wire leader? It's like, do you want to fight a barracuda to the boat? Do you want to fight a shark to the boat? For that one out of a million wahoo that you might get on it, no wire. But yeah, if you're on different spots and those kind of things happen, move on to the next one.
So a good one for a lot of us kind of get into it, just not having a ton of time on the water. How are you determining your cadence, your rhythm, like your flick, kind of like your motion for like when you're getting out there for it? How are you determining what your go-to is and then when to mix it up and just stuff like that while you're fishing?
So that's a really hard question because that goes the way you set up the question kind of stops me from answering it how I would answer it, which is, you said other than time on the water, how would I do this? And the answer is time
Yeah,
on
I
the
should
water, right? So
remove that. The time on the water, like for it.
right. It is being on the water and being able to hold the rod properly, have it properly positioned on your arm, feel the rod load up, understand how the recoil is going to be, understand that if I can, I can make a punchier action or I can make a slower sweeping action on it. I vary my cadence a lot, like all the time. I'm varying my cadence until I kind of get it dialed into that action that they wanna use. Don't be afraid to experiment. That's the cool part about this, is that it is really a great learning experience for you while you're out there. Take the time to understand that not everything is going to work, but by you taking the time to do it and do it properly, it's going to pay dividends for you in the long run. Don't rush for that instant gratification. I mean, if you get it, cool, great, congratulations. But for the most part, folks are going to take time to do these things. So time on the water is really going to help you perfect that technique. It's you've heard the phrase, it's the Indian, it's not the arrow, right? Oftentimes that's really what it is. I can be fishing next to someone using the same jig, the same rod, and the same reel. I'll catch fish, they won't catch fish. They won't. What the hell are you doing? That's different. It's you learn that over time, and everybody can do it. That's the cool part, right? Anybody who's out there can go and learn this and just kick ass with it, which I think is fun.
We had that same discussion I told you when I was on the Polaris. We're all dropping, and then I catch a 60, someone catches a 120 pounder. You're not doing anything different with them. Like you said, a lot of this is luck of the draw for you. You could be doing everything the same, and we've all seen it. That the guy out there who has the least qualified equipment, we'll just say, hooks into something he shouldn't have hooked into, and they catch the biggest fish many times. Like the fish don't care what you're fishing with; they just want to eat for it. So I've noticed that a lot of times. It's like you can have the most expensive equipment and you don't catch anything, and somebody who has nothing hooks into stuff.
Right. I mean, to a certain extent, fishing's like poker, right? There's going to be those bad beats where you see the guy who has a quarter of a spool of braid that's he's down to his backing and somehow lands a 40-pound snowy, right? You're going to see stuff like that. Like, oh, is this good? Right? They have no idea what
Yeah.
just happened. The difference is that as you get better, it's going to be much more
Mm-hmm.
consistent. Like that's why there's 10 people at the final table at the World Series of Poker, right? It's because they're poker. It's the same thing with this kind of fishing. Like, will I catch the biggest fish every time I go out there? Probably, maybe not. But I'll be very consistent in how I do it, and I will land more fish than a more inexperienced angler, just because I've had that time to really know what can go wrong, right? Understand the limitations of your tackle, understand all that stuff. You will have those bad beats, you'll have the break-offs, all that stuff will happen. But over time, the consistency will show, and you'll constantly start producing and be like what I mentioned in the beginning when I was on head boats. Why are those guys catching the fish and I'm not? They put in the time for it.
No, that makes complete sense for it. And that's a big thing I've noticed is that you can have all the money in the world and buy everything, but it doesn't mean it's going to work unless you actually know what you're doing with it.
Exactly.
Right? So you get out there and you have 20 grand in equipment, you don't know what the hell you're doing with it, and then you just look like an idiot with 20 grand with equipment for it.
Exactly right.
So what is a question or something like tips and suggestions that people don't ask you? Like I told you before, like what are some things that like you were like, if only you asked me about this, it would save you so much more. Like people probably go to all the questions I asked you, and there's probably like this golden question that's just off the path a little bit that nobody's asked you, and you're like, you guys would gain so much knowledge if you knew about that.
If you ever watched videos of me on the water, I'm not going to ask the question for you, but I'll say what to pay attention for. Notice the position of my shoulders. That's it. And just watch the videos and watch what my shoulders do in the water, right? A lot of times people think that slow pitch is a completely vertical game, right? It's up and down, up and down, up and down. That's not necessarily the case, okay? There's a lot of forward movement in my shoulders that you'll see, and there's a reason for that, and it's to get the proper action on jigs, and a lot of people don't pay attention to that little subtlety.
That's a great thing for it. I don't have too anything else for it. Was there any other things that you feel I've asked you or when I kind of feel like I hammered you, almost like an interview for like applying for a job?
Yeah.
For it. No, we
No,
really
man.
appreciate you working with us. Like I said, we're still a fairly new group, and then we're trying to get it going big in Texas for it. And we are doing what you mentioned before is we work with one of the charters here at Smith and Sons. We do slow pitch only trips where he brings no bait, and so
Yep.
there is no safety net for it.
Yeah.
So if you're not catching for it, it kind of makes everybody go down that path for it.
Yeah, and it's a lot of fun, and sometimes it's funny because you'll do those slow pitch trips only, and sometimes the bite will fire off and it'll be insane. Sometimes it'll be a little slower. Oftentimes, I find if you have one person fishing bait on a boat, and that bite kind of fires off with the bait, then they kind of get keyed into jigs a little bit more. But for sure, don't stop doing those jig only trips. I think they're awesome. I think it's a great way to learn, especially from other anglers on the boat. Hey, what's working for you? Why are you doing this? And it's a great way for people without as much experience to learn from people with more experience, or vice versa. And never stop learning. If you think that you know it all, you don't. Every time I'm on the water, I learn something new. There's always something new that you can learn, a new situation that you're in, a new current that you're in, a new bite that you've never experienced before. What the hell was that? And just that conglomeration of all of those experiences is what build and build and build and build until you become a much better angler overall, and more consistent. Because I think that's what we all want. We all want to have like consistent performance while we're out there, and it's fucking fun to catch a big fish on this stuff. So
It's so much fun for like my story's pretty quick for it. We went on a snapper trip and I saw this guy with this little rod. I'm like, there's no way he's gonna catch it. He's gonna break a rod. And then the dude just like, if it was the equivalent of a race, he lapped me like just like consistently like bringing him over the railing. Goes, anybody need a big one? I'm like, I hate you. Like I got nothing for it. And he's just throwing him over, just like donating. I'm like, I got to do this. I've got to. My pride and my competitiveness is like, I can't not do this for it. And it just like more fun. Like bait fishing, one, you smell like bait at the end of the day. So Shane Johnson, one of our big admin, he hates the smell of squid. What a passion. And that's why he got into it as well. Nobody likes smelling like squid. And two, you just drop it. It's almost like dumb fishing, like you said, for it. And there's kind of a reward of
yeah,
doing it correctly when you hook into it. Like there's a sense of like accomplishment when you get something big or anything on a
yeah,
jig.
it's the archery of fishing, if
Yeah.
you will. It is the most sporting thing I can think. You've got the lightest line that you can use. You've got a rod that you can fight the fish on. You've got basically just all skill, and there's a certain personality that kind of gravitates towards that, and it's just a lot of fun. So I hope everybody can enjoy it, learn as much as you can, never stop learning, and just have a good time with it. I'm pretty accessible. I usually, I like to help people out. One of my biggest things is I hate, secrets, and people not just telling you what's going on. It's a lot easier to just to try to explain to folks. There's only so much I can explain over a call, or a seminar. But when you're on the water, if I'm ever on the water with you, don't be afraid to pick somebody's brain when you're out there. Everyone's usually really receptive to help. Don't have that scarcity mindset where you want to keep those secrets close to you. If you can be a better fisherman than me, by all means, do it, man. Have a good time, enjoy, knock it out of the park, and yeah,
We
that's about it.
we definitely want to extend an invitation to you. So if you're ever down in the Texas area or we're making a trip down here, we have teamed up with a lot of the captains, whatnot. We have a lot of 46 hours, 36 hours dedicated trips for it all over. Some of them are nice because we do slow pitching during the day, and then we go to the rigs for tuna at night, so you get a nice little mix up for it. So that's one of the big things. And so we definitely want to appreciate you taking the time and just commenting in the group. So not just this, but we've seen you've been very active on it, so we're hugely appreciative of that too. And I would love to extend a follow-up this sometimes. Whenever you might have a big trip in the future, maybe I can get you to come on afterwards and you just tell us about your trip. Like you did the
Yeah,
big tuna one for it. We just do a recap and you just kind of tell us about jigging wherever you were and we can vicariously live through you a little bit.
that'd be cool.
And,
Yeah,
so,
happy to
and
do
what
it.
is your Instagram so everybody can follow you?
So Mr. Benny Ortiz on Instagram, Mr. Benny Ortiz. You can find me on there. I've got my Facebook, which is my regular Facebook page, and I don't have like a YouTube or anything like that. And I'm on some videos. Shimano has a bunch of stuff out there with me in it. There's going to be some really cool stuff coming out soon with Shimano. Got AFCO videos that are out there as well with me in it. Various seminars that I've done are online where you can get a lot of the information that I've talked to you about today. Yeah, check out all the stuff. It's pretty cool. Enjoy the ride.
No, we appreciate it. And like, there's a ton of great YouTube videos we've been out there for. One of my favorite, he did Shimano talk a few years ago, and that was a hugely informational one for me. And then your video you did with the Johnny Jigs guys.
Yeah, that was the one with JP
Yeah.
Rose. Yeah, that was a really good one. It's kind of like this. It was the first time I talked to him. And we just kind of go through everything. That one was good. That Johnny Jigs one was great. That was a lot of fun. That was a deep water trip. That was a hell of a trip. But there's some stuff coming down the pipe that I think is going to be pretty cool.
Feel free to share it with us once you get on there for it and it gets all official, whatnot. Feel free, and love to see more of any of your content for it. I think that's it, sir. I'll let you give
All right.
back as much as your night for it. We really appreciate it.
All right.
All right.
Have a good night. Take it easy. Thanks.
Thanks, Benny. Bye.